We've all heard of parasites, and if we haven't, a cursory search on the internet will give us many examples. There are many parasites, and one specific one which is interesting is the kind that zombifies its host. Zombification is not a metaphysical or a fantasy concept. It is defined as a state of being disconnected from reality or being possessed. This is a true sense of the term possession by an external agency which has usurped our will and has with its own. And this is not a fantasy. This is an actual natural phenomenon. So let's call these gene-based parasites. But because what if I were to tell you that they were meme-based parasites or ideological parasites? And although humans are not affected by these zombifying natural parasites, as are other life forms, none that I know of, the meme-based parasite is exclusive to the human species. And I will explain myself as we go along, hopefully. So first we must analyze what these zombifying gene-based parasites are, how they work, how they behave, and why. From what I know, what they do is they infiltrate another organism, masking their genetic signature so that the host's autoimmune system does not perceive them. Then they attach themselves to the host organism's nervous system, which is of course the source of will, or how I define will. If you don't understand or you don't know how I define will, there's a monologue where I give my definitions of will. At which point it takes over the organism, essentially. The organism ceases to be its original self. For instance, a zombified ant, I think the parasite is called lancet fluck or something like that. Zombified ant ceases to behave as an ant according to its genetic programming. It no longer works for the colony, for the well-being of the colony. Now it's under the control of the parasite that directs it to behave in self-destructive ways. And of course the parasite perishes with the host, and this is part of the parasite's life cycle. We should keep this in mind as we go along, because it's going to be the core of what I'm speaking about concerning mimetic parasites. Another thing to consider, to keep in mind, is the idea of selfish genes. Dawkins, I think, coined the term. What does he mean by selfish gene? It means that an organism is not the focus of nature. Its survival is not the intent. The nature is only interested about the survival of the genes the individual carries. So the individual is really a means for propagating advantageous genes. So now we could say that given Dawkins' definition, we can say that there might be a selfish meme, that is an ideology that uses humans as its proxies, as a means of propagating itself, and may compel them to behave in self-destructive and suicidal, self-destructive ways because the survival of the individual doesn't matter, but the survival of the ideology is the true intent. Another thing to keep in mind as we go forward is the idea of harmony between genes and memes. What do I mean? And this has to do with my definition of nihilism, which I've also made a monologue about. So what do I mean by harmony? I mean, what are memes? They are extensions of the gene. So when they are in harmony, the meme, the ideology, helps the gene propagate itself. Whereas if it is parasitical, we can call that a symbiotic relationship between genes and memes. But if it's parasitical, then the meme acts contrary to the gene's propagation. So the meme is actually a nullifier of the gene's intent to reproduce itself. And this is evident in what I will be describing as we go along. So the gene-based parasite that zombifies its target host and uses it to propagate itself. What it does is, it, like I said, it takes over the target host and uses it to replicate itself. And I've seen this with small organisms, but I've also seen it with regard to a moose that was zombified, and that was a strange thing to see. You can see this big moose stumbling through the forest, infected by a tiny little parasite that had attached itself to its brainstem and made it behave erratically, and eventually it perishes, and that's part of the parasite's, like I said, reproductive cycle. So now, in order to make the connection between the gene-based and the meme-based parasite, the gene-based using the 4-code system of DNA, and the meme-based parasite, of course, using the binary method of language and linguistic intercourse. We should now analyze how the zombification process has been represented in movies, in Hollywood movies, because in this case, art is imitating life, or is life imitating art? I'll let you decide. So now we have to make the connections by jumping from the gene to the meme via the mediation of art. Language is an art form itself. So how are zombies most often depicted in Hollywood films? First of all, they are represented as being individualistic. And this is in most movies. There are some movies that depict the zombies as having some kind of hierarchy and organization, such as the movie I Am Legend. But most often the zombies are autonomous actors, and yet they behave in uniform ways, which is often the case with people that claim to be individualistic themselves, because they are compelled by their impulses, which are based on their genes, and these make them behave in very collective ways, very uniform ways. We witness similar behavior among the birds, flocking birds, or fish that school, or herds of animals. They behave autonomously, and yet as a collective. And this, I think, is called, if I'm not mistaken, swarm intelligence, or distributed systems. Essentially what it means is the individual takes cues from its neighbor, and its neighbor takes cues from its neighbor, and then the cascading effect makes the entire group behave as if it was one organism, when in fact there is no controlling will. It seems like a school of fishes moving as if it were one single organism, and a flock of birds is behaving as if it were controlled by some central intelligence. And the same thing is depicted in the movies concerning the zombies. So they are individuals that behave as if they were a collective. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. Another characteristic of Hollywood zombies, which reminds us of the zombification that occurs in nature, is that the individuals infected no longer have a biological identity. That is, their original genetic, biological identity no longer matters. For the zombies, there's only two categories. There are the infected and the uninfected. So if the individual infected was male or black or white or whatever ethnicity it was before it was infected, it does not matter. It ceases to be that. And so the zombies begin to have a uniform look to them also, where the biological identities don't matter. So for instance, if a female mother is infected by this zombifying virus, they usually define it as a virus. She would not recognize her own offspring, but would actually attack them, because she is no longer a female of the Homo sapient species, but is now under the control of the virus. And for the virus, there are no kin. There is no race, there is no sex, there is no gender, there is no ethnicity. There's just the infected and the uninfected. And this is also something we should keep in mind, because it is the core of the zombifying ideology, or the meme parasite. Another characteristic of movie Hollywood zombies is their hedonism, their need to consume, to feed, which is their core need. So the term hedonistic applies to them. And this is also applicable to the meme parasite. The zombie is driven, compelled to constantly attack and feed on the flesh of the uninfected. This is part of the propagation of the virus, because it must spread from one host to the other, and it only spreads through physical intercourse. And attacking an uninfected host is part of this compulsion that the zombie cannot resist. Let's take note that the zombies don't attack each other. They never attack each other to feed on each other, because the virus is messianic. We can call it messianic because it cannot tolerate any other organism but itself. So the parasite cannot tolerate anything that's not infected, and this is why it never attacks infected hosts. It only seeks out and attacks the uninfected. So we can call it messianic. The irony being, and this applies also to the parasitical ideologies, is that if they accomplish their goal to infect everybody, everything, then they will cease to have hosts to infect, and that would mean their own end, essentially. So we can see here the self-destructive impulse of the parasite itself. Not only does it destroy the host, but in the process it destroys itself. Because it's messianic, it needs uninfected to propagate. And when they cease, due to the parasite's insatiable appetite, then it will cease. So we might say that the parasite ideology, the parasite meme, has an eschatological motive. A world ending, an end of times motive, as part of its compulsion, its messianic compulsion, its intolerance for anything that's not infected. Another characteristic of Hollywood zombies is their inability to tolerate sunlight. They are creatures of the dark, of the lunar. And this harkens us back to the Platonic cave, and how exiting the cave exposes the individual to the intolerable brilliance of sun. Sun is always discriminating. It exposes. And sunlight destroys viruses that need proxies to hide within. We must also keep in mind that the equivalent of the nervous system in a society is government, the media, the entertainment. Because what is the nervous system? It's an organ that collects and disseminates data. So we can find the equivalent of the nervous system in man-made systems. So this is we have to keep this in mind when we're talking about a meme-based, ideology-based parasite. So let's encapsulate the traits of the proverbial Hollywood zombie. It is voracious in appetites. Its hunger is insatiable. In other words, it's hedonistic, and this makes it predictable and easily controlled. It is individualistic and yet behaves as a collective. It's independent and yet behaves as if it were dominated by a will. This is because it is completely given over to its impulses. So it swarms, it herds, it flocks, it takes cues from its neighbor. It is destructive towards biological diversity. It only perceives what is infected and what is not infected, and must reduce everything to being a host, to being infected. It tolerates no alternatives. So that means it's globalizing. It is messianic. It cannot tolerate alternate ways of being. And this is part of its self-destructive process, its cycle of propagation. Its totalitarianism is what leads to its inevitable destruction, if it were to succeed. But it never completely succeeds. It eventually is discovered, or has been discovered up until now. But if it were to succeed, just imagine if the zombies in the movies had infected every human on the planet. What would happen to them? They don't eat each other, they don't attack each other, so they would perish. They don't attack other creatures. They only attack humans, uninfected humans. So that means automatically that once every human is infected, the parasite ceases to exist. It goes back to its original form, which is words on a page, words with no reference. But that's another issue. I'm not going to get into that one. It's more complicated. Another characteristics is it only comes out like most vermin in the dark. That's where it flourishes. In other words, it's occult in nature. It's lunar. It doesn't create its own life because it doesn't reproduce through like life, through intercourse, physical intercourse, but it must propagate by infecting. So it can't use other zombies to propagate itself, so it must use only what is uninfected. And so its conception of the world is binary. It is divided between the infected and the uninfected, and recognizes no other trait, no other defining characteristic, no other identity. That's its only identity. It's us and them. So its ultimate goal is global. It must infect everything. And that's where its myth concerning the end of times comes in, as the inevitability of its own dogma. Another characteristic is that it propagates through violence, not through reasoning, but through acts of violence. It must impose itself. It must infect others. And it does so insidiously. It doesn't do so openly, like the gene-based virus. It doesn't openly present itself to its target host, but it infiltrates it. Its weakness. It conceals itself within its target host, and then it takes it over from inside. It takes over its nervous system, which in our context is the institutions of whatever institution propagates and collects data. Once you control those institutions, you control the entire superorganism. You can say the nation state. So we have organisms infected by these gene-based viruses, and what we're dealing with meme-based viruses are superorganisms, or societies, you can call them, or empires, or ethnicities, or nations. So you can see the correlations. We have a gene-based parasite. We have a meme-based parasite, or if you prefer, dogma or a nihilistic ideology, which imposes itself upon an organism and makes it behave in ways that are self-destructive. And then we have the from gene to meme, from organism to superorganism. These are the distinctions we have to make if we wish to understand what the fuck I'm talking about. Having said all that, I will not identify the ideology, because there is an ideology like that. That is a parasitical ideology. What's funny is this internet character from Montreal, a psychologist. He wrote a book about parasitical ideologies, and it's ironic given who he is. I'm not going to say anything more about that, but he should know about parasitical ideologies.